Essentially, the workshop is about connecting to nature. Presumably people that take this workshop have an interest in plants, and the plants are really our doorway through to nature connection. I'm coming from a paradigm that there's more to the world than just the physical things that we see with our physical senses. And so what we're doing is we are connecting with plants on, you could say, on a spiritual level in order to receive healing from them, in order to be able to receive teachings from them. But the way to do that, it's a complicated thing because first of all and foremost, it requires us to be able to calm down our mind and to open up to senses that we have that are not necessarily highly developed growing up in our society, where most of the emphasis is placed on the logical mind and perceiving the world and in operating in the world on a very mental level. So that what we're doing is we're working on a piece of land that I have an ongoing relationship with, where I've taught many of these types of workshops before. So we have the support of the land, the plants that live there, the spirits of the land. And the workshop involves two essential types of exercises. One is exercises that help us to calm down our minds so that we can tune in on a deeper level, and the others to be able to use those plants that we find on the landscape there as helpers to help us open that door to can not only to connect with them but to connect with nature, the macrocosm, and also to connect with our own heart. And that's a big part of it. Now, of course, we don't just go in there willy-nilly. I have to sort of set the stage, and by creating and presenting a paradigm, a template that allows us to do these exercises and to be able to do this work. Now, the template is just one that I've worked with over a very long period of time that I find very, very well suited to helping people to connect in this way. So over the course of the week, we'll be doing a lot of this. There'll be a mixture of lectures, a mixture of exercises that we perform to help us to connect, and then periods of time where we go out on the landscape and work directly with the plants using the paradigm and the techniques that we're developing over the course of the workshop. That's a very abbreviated version. It's a lot more complex than that. But the beautiful thing is having the 6 days. It's like getting some time. It's like spending time in the greenhouse under ideal conditions that have been created to allow us to kind of accelerate that process, so that over the course of those 6 days, the people that participate are able to have enough opportunity to have experiences that gives them the capacity to carry this on when they go back to their normal life, and be able to continue to work with those things. Because if you can only do it in the context of the workshop, it's kind of it's fun and neat, but it doesn't really give us that opportunity. What we want to be able to do is to work with it in our day-to-day life, and that's the importance of it, which is why I've found it necessary to do these workshops. And of course, this is just the first of them, but to do these workshops in this intensive manner so that people get an opportunity to experience enough to be able to work with it when they go back to their day-to-day lives. In reality, no. actually. And the reason is because what makes it work best is to go into it with as few preconceived ideas as possible. I've taught this workshop for decades, and it's I've really honed it well. So what I present during the workshop is a template, a worldview, as it were, that allows us to do that kind of work. And again, that isn't to say that there aren't other worldviews or other templates that work just as well. It's just that it's critical that for the purposes of the workshop that everybody's coming at it from the same point of view. you know Obviously, you know if anything, reading is not so much something that could be a benefit in advance of the workshop, but certainly any kind of meditation uh, certainly is, because our capacity to do this is really contingent upon our ability to calm our mind and get into a much more open and receptive state instead of spinning out in our thoughts, which is what we do most of the time. So, in terms of preparation, although I do present certain very specific types of meditation techniques in the workshop that we will be working with, our capacity to calm our mind is the most important uh, tool, let's say, going into it. There's really nothing that you can read that would be helpful. However, during the workshop, I will present things that you can read, like a bibliography of things that you can read that would be helpful as you move on from it. But not going into it, no. What you're saying is true. We're all part of nature,
Yeah.
and we're all, whether we're aware of it or not, we are connected to nature. And
Yeah.
and by nature, I mean something bigger than just the what we see on the landscape, because to
Yeah.
me nature exists in a spiritual realm as
Right.
well, and we all have been given capacities to connect.
Mm.
It's just that living in the modern world, we put so much emphasis on rational thinking, and our whole educational system. Maybe when we get educated, say in the arts, there is a little bit more openness to developing some kind of a deeper sensitivity. But for the most part, in society, we have a very mental way of interacting with the world. And our education system is meant to foster that, and quite rightly so, because it's intended to give us the tools we need to survive in our society, right? However, our society is the problem, really. It's very out of balance, and it's very disconnected, and it's very, how to put it, dissociated. We are dissociated from our emotions. We're dissociated from our spirit. We're dissociated from the natural world where we live in, because we interact with it in a kind of mental model, and we tend to throw away everything that doesn't fit into that mental model. So we're taught, that when we have these intuitions and sensitivities of things that are greater than what we can perceive with our physical senses, we're told that that's not real. And we're told, and over time, through interacting with the world in this very mental way, we literally lose our capacity to be sensitive to these things. The capacity is still there. It's completely bulldozed by the mind, and so it becomes shut out and pushed to the side and suppressed. So, in a way, it's not about learning something that's new. It's about learning how to unlearn that modern reductionistic rationalistic way of viewing the world, that way it has its own benefits within a certain narrow realm, but life is so much bigger and so much more than that. So, our mind is essentially a tool. It's a tool that has very, very useful capacities within a certain narrow spectrum, but there's so much more to life than that. And so what we want to do is develop that capacity to re-experience and open up to capacities that we already have in order to experience more of the natural world and more of life and more of who and what we are than just our thoughts, right? So developing that those sensitivities, which was the way you put it, is definitely a big part of what we're doing, right? And that's essential. And of course, nature, we're part of nature, and nature is our greatest helper
Yeah.
in this way, because these are all capacities that we all have through which we connect with the natural world, both in the physical realm and in the spiritual realm and the energetic realm as well. Well, I spend several hours in the workshop explaining that. You could say that if you look at the traditional world, sort of indigenous worldview, and of course, there are many expressions of that all around the world,
Hmm.
but there are a lot of commonalities. You could say that the life force is I don't want to sound too new agey here, but it's kind of like an energy field that allows the spirit to interact with the physical world.
Hmm.
So between, in the various indigenous worldviews, the spirit world, the physical world is seen as a particular kind of expression of the spiritual world, but that
Hmm.
the spiritual world is much bigger than the physical world. You could
Okay.
say so. There are aspects of of the spiritual world that are that correspond to the physical world, but there are aspects of the spirit world that don't correspond to the physical world. But this is the old mind body problem that goes back, in the Western
Hmm.
world, it goes back a long way.
Yeah.
If there's a spiritual world and a physical world and they're two distinctly different things, how do they interact? Well, in the traditional world views, the life force is the interface where the spirit world interacts with the physical world.
I
And
got
so
Okay.
and the best way to think of that is, or at least to experience it, there are many things that we work with in healing traditions that are expressions of the life force. For instance, in Chinese medicine, qi, right? When you're measuring or working with acupuncture points, they don't correspond to physical nerves in the body. They correspond to another sort of energetic system in which the life force interacts with the body. In Ayurvedic medicine, they think of it as prana, and they talk about nadis as opposed to acupuncture points. But it's the same thing. As long as in the traditional worldview, as long as the spirit is interacting or engaging with the physical body and it's alive, there is this life force that is the interface between. But when a person dies or anything dies, that and the spirit withdraws from engaging with it in that particular way, the life force is withdrawn as well. Right? Because the life force no longer exists because it is a it's something that arises when the spirit interacts with matter. Okay, I don't, that I could spend hours talking just about that, and it's better to do it through analogies, and that's one of the reasons why the Spirit of Herbs courses exist, right? In the other courses that I teach, I especially, healing with herbs is the course where I kind of lay out the paradigm, and I talk about the different worldviews and the life force and the spirit world, and the fact that we as human beings and the world that we live in is more than just matter. And I talk about all those things, and it comes into all the courses that I teach. It comes in as a component, but it's purely abstract and theoretical at that point. The reason why the Spirit of Herbs workshops are so important is because if that is just an idea, it really isn't usable. In the Spirit of Herbs workshops, what we actually do is experience it so that it becomes a living experience. And at that point, it becomes something real, not just an idea. In all the other courses, it's presented in a theoretical way, and it's just an idea. But the reason why those Spirit of Herbs courses are so important is because it gives us the capacity. It creates an environment and a context that allows us to actually experience it. And at that point, it becomes a living thing, a living experience, as opposed to just an abstract idea. Um,
Different levels of understanding. So at a certain level, something I got it, but it needs to be digested more,
yeah. And in the
more and
workshop,
more.
I provide a paradigm that
Okay.
creates an intellectual context that helps us to understand what it is we're
Yeah,
experiencing.
yeah.
Right? But if it's nothing more than an intellectual paradigm, to
It
me it's
would be.
useless. Right? It
Exactly.
has to be a living experience.
Yeah.
It is definitely for anyone who wants to more deeply connect with nature and with plants. It doesn't matter what your profession is. Plants, in my own experience, plants are important helpers on our life path and our healing path. They are not just in the sense that we can take them in the form of different remedies, tinctures, teas, homeopathic remedies, or whatever. Yeah, that's a way we can interact with plants that is extremely helpful to help us on our healing journey. But plants are also important teachers, and they can provide guidance to us as well. So, presumably, like I said earlier, anybody that would take a workshop like this, that's called the Spirit of Herbs, has an interest in plants. But as I said, really what I'm doing is I'm using plants as a doorway with their innate capacities to help us and heal us and guide us as a doorway into being able to experience more of life, to be able to connect with senses that we have that we don't even realize we have, because in our society they're not nurtured and developed. And as a result, we talk a lot about these days that the term is being used as nature deficit disorder. That's a really good term, because in my own experience, as a in my own life and as a healer working with other people, what I would have to say is that we are part of nature, and connection with nature isn't just something that is neat and or interesting. It is actually a human need. And just like if we don't get enough of a nutrient, we experience a deficiency disorder. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that kills you, like scurvy. Even if our vitamin C levels are at suboptimum levels, it interferes with our normal functioning. And it's similar with nature. We actually have a very real physical and spiritual need to connect with nature. And if that isn't being nurtured and developed, it has a negative impact on our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well being. So, anybody that wants to connect more with plants and connect more with nature and develop their intuitive and spiritual and energetic capacities to experience more of the world and more of life will benefit from this workshop. They don't have to be someone who wants to practice herbalism. Nevertheless, you know, some of my students who are in the program who are intending to become herbalists, of course, this is something that helps them to develop a much more deep connection with nature and with herbs that helps them in their role as herbalists. But that doesn't have to be what you're doing. All you have to do is be interested in plants, interested in nature, and want to experience more of life, deeper connection in your life. That's really what this workshop is all about. It's pretty intensive. I mean, we at the very least we start. Well, we basically we go all day, and sometimes the bulk of it of what we do occurs between breakfast and dinner throughout the day. But I also give the participants exercises that they sometimes have to do before breakfast, and there are things that we do, very very important exercises that we do in the evening because they're actually later, at night. Doing them at night actually facilitates the process. So it's a pretty intensive thing. But basically, as I said, there are essentially, you could say, four elements to the workshop. One is I have to create a paradigm, a template, a worldview that helps the participants to understand what we're doing, to have a way of framing it and understanding it and organizing it so that it makes sense. So you could say in the first couple of days there is a lot of lecture. Not the whole day, maybe 2 or 3 hours a day of lecture in those first 2 days while I'm essentially creating that template. Then running parallel to it are two different things. I'm teaching techniques to help the participants calm their mind because that's critical. The one thing that interferes the most with our capacity to connect is when we're too caught up in our thoughts. So there's a group of techniques that I'm teaching to help participants calm their mind. And these are things I've been teaching for decades. So I've honed it down to techniques that tend to get the best results for the greatest number of people from different backgrounds, right? So when I'm teaching techniques, we're doing these, you could say, meditations to help calm our mind. Then I'm teaching another group of techniques that help us to open up and expand our awareness and to be able to connect and communicate with plants and with nature. So those things are going on while I'm creating this worldview. Okay. And then there is a fourth component, which is where I'm sending the participants out into the landscape and into what we call a sit spot. A place where they go and they work on and develop and practice the things that we're learning there. Okay. So I'll send them out with exercises and say, okay, we've done this and we've done that. Now I want you to go out and practice it. And I'm giving you a task to do. Communicate with a plant or connect with the landscape in a certain way using the techniques that we're doing. Now, after the first couple of days, I've essentially created the paradigm, and the lecture content becomes almost non existent, except insofar as whenever I introduce a new technique, I have to discuss it and explain it and help them to understand how it fits into what we've been doing, and then they go out and they practice it. So essentially there's a little more lecture in the first couple of days, but we're practicing the initial stages of developing these two types of techniques: awareness techniques and calming the mind techniques. But they're going out onto the landscape, and as the week progresses, they're spending more and more time out on the landscape practicing these things and actually using them to connect. So that's essentially how it looks. The basic day, we have breakfast from 8 to 9, and then we have dinner at 6, and there's a lunch break, and there's a couple of other breaks in between. People are doing things all of that time, but also on a couple of the nights, I'll have them do some work after dinner. And on a couple of the mornings, I'll have them do some work before breakfast on their own, practicing what we've learned. The other thing I usually do during the workshop is a couple of what I call teaching fires, where we sit around the fire and I just answer questions. Any questions that are coming up for the participants during that time. And we just sit around the fire and they can ask whatever questions they have. And, and we're just chilling around the fire, in the evenings after dinner. So that's essentially what the workshop looks like. Okay, that's sort of a two-part thing. The first part is that the actual space itself. It's a beautiful facility. It was originally designed as a school, and the way it looks is there's a bunch of bedrooms around the sides, and then there's washrooms, and then there's a common area with a big, beautiful, almost industrial type kitchen, and a common space where we gather to have meals. And there's a loft up on top where we may spend, if for instance, if I need to do a lecture or I need to do an exercise where it might not be conducive if it was raining, then we go up on the loft, up above the kitchen area where and do some indoor stuff. But actually, usually the weather cooperates. And on some of the exercises, it doesn't matter if it's raining. It's important that people bring the right gear, because sometimes they're going to be doing things on the land when it might be wet, and it's important to be able to keep yourself warm and dry. But almost all of it will be outdoors. And the facility sits on some beautiful land that is partly cultivated, and then there's a beautiful forest, and a lot of time is spent out on the land doing it. And I have a particular relationship with this land. You don't just go places and do workshops like this. You have to get permission from the land. And I have, the land agrees to support the work that we're doing there and the ancestors that are there. And we've been doing this work for a long time. So over the years of doing these workshops, it really builds up the energy on the land. So that's something that is important as well. The right environment and the right energy to support the experiences that people are having there. The other thing is that in my own work, and that's a whole other thing, the different roles I play in the work I do, I have to be able to create a safe container so that people can safely open up and experience these things. And that's done in cooperation with the land itself and also the plants that live there. And we're all kind of in an agreement and we're working together to create the right environment to help the people that are there to experience what they need to experience so that it facilitates where they're at in their life, and they're all from different backgrounds, and helps them to receive whatever healing and instruction that they need from the land and from the plants to help them at whatever stage they're at in their life, and be able to experience enough of it so that when they leave, that process that is initiated there can continue. Okay, beyond that I can't say very much because every group is different. What I can say from my own experience is whoever is there at any given time and the group that's there are the people that are supposed to be there. It's like there's an agreement between spirit and the land and all those people on a spiritual level that we are going to gather at this time in this place. And what comes out of that particular group of people being on that land at that time is just what all those people need in that moment. And so I can't, say what plants are we going to work with or anything like that, because my role as a teacher is to be able to feel that. I'm in constant communication with the land and I've got to feel the energy of the group. And so the workshop isn't always the same. I have a toolkit of things that I have to do, and then a broader toolkit of things that we could do. And they're not always done in the same order. And my role is to make sure that that group of people that's gathered at that time gets what they need. So how the order of things and how it moves, and whether there's, as I said, there's a core group of things that we always do, but there's other things around that, different directions that we can go. And I don't know what they're going to be until we're there and I'm feeling the group, and also watching and experiencing them, because it's a lot of time we spend sharing. When I go out, when the participants go out on the land and they do things, the next thing we do is we all gather around and share their experiences so that they can learn from each other. And during that process, it helps me gauge what, where what things they're finding are more easy and what things they're finding are more challenging and what their needs are. And I'm constantly adjusting what the next step is going to be based on the experience of the group. So I can't, it's not like there's this course and you go and there's a series of lectures and they go in this order. It's not like that at all. It's more like a ceremony. It's like a living experience, and it manifests the way it needs to for any group of people that's gathered at any time. So it's not a fixed thing. It's more like a living thing. It's not like just going to a class and a lecture. It's a very different thing. Um, I mainly created this workshop because it's who I am, right? I mean, I'm lucky that connection to nature has been with me all my life. And when I was younger, and still today, I spend as much time in nature as I can. Well, my work day usually begins with a walk on the land and ends with a walk on the land every single day. It's just what I do. And I don't consider that uh, I consider it an essential part of my life, not just my life in terms of who I am and what I need, but my work, because whenever I'm on the land, I'm learning new things. So that it was that connection to nature which led me to ultimately become a herbalist through a very circuitous path. I never actually made a decision I'm going to be a herbalist. It kind of happened organically, but I also have a very strong connection to the land and also the indigenous traditions of the land. And over my lifetime, I've spent a lot of time doing ceremony with indigenous elders on the land, and that's part of my connection as well. I also quite a few, through the '90s, spent a lot of time studying with Tom Brown Jr., who has a school down in had a school. He sadly passed away last year down in New Jersey, where he teaches wilderness survival and nature connection. So I spent a lot of time studying with him in the sort of early to mid '90s. And so he was one of my mentors as well in terms of my own developing my own connection to nature and as a teacher and helping me along on that path. And also the plants themselves and the land itself. The more we invest in our lives, it's like anything, it's a relationship. Life is about relationships. So the more that we invest in our relationship of connecting with and developing our relationship with the land where we live, with the plants, with animals, with spirit, the more deep that connection is, and the more it develops. And that's, to me, that is sort of a necessary component of the work that I do. And so, yes, it's like I said earlier, I impart that worldview in the courses that I teach, but in the most of the courses that I teach, there's so much information that has to be conveyed. I can orient in a particular way and point in a certain direction, but these courses were really necessary because, as I said, it's this kind of thing is the essence of who we are. And if it's just a theory, if it's just an idea, it really isn't useful at all. It's like meditation, right? You can talk about meditation all you want, you can study spiritual traditions, but if you don't put it into practice, it's useless. It's just food for the ego. Yeah, I know this, so what? If you're not living it, it's meaningless. It's great if you can spew Vedantic philosophy, right? But if you're not living it, if you're not putting it into practice, if you're not meditating, if you're not experiencing your inner self, it's just a bunch of thoughts. And the mind, most of who and what we are is beyond the mind. The mind can create templates. It can create ways of, it's like a boat on the ocean that helps us to get to from point A to point B, but the boat can never understand the ocean. It can float on it, and and as someone conducting the boat, we can sort of steer a path, but the ocean is so vast and mysterious, and that the mind can never comprehend life, because life is a mystery. Yet the mind is a useful tool that we have that helps us navigate in the world, right? But if we're strictly living out of our mind, we're not really living life to the fullest. So we have to, so the purpose of workshops like this is to help us to use our mind in a useful way, to orient and help us orient in a useful way. But ultimately, you know, anything that we can say about it is simply pointing in a direction. It has to be experienced. It can never really be understood. I mean, logistically, I would say this though: it's important to register as early as possible, for two reasons, and two very opposite reasons. One is sometimes this course fills up, and the other is that because it is a major commitment in terms of, I have to have somebody that caters it in terms of use of the lodge and other things, and there's a lot of costs involved for me in running the workshop. I have to if in any given year, if there isn't enough registration and I have to cancel the workshop, it has to be done well in advance, because I have to allow Seed Lodge to be able to rent the space. And I've got to give enough warning to the person, to Kate, who caters it, to be, so that, she's not caught at the last minute. So usually I have to, if it's going to fill up, it usually fills up by late April to mid-May, because it's a 6-day workshop. Usually people plan for it well in advance. So usually it fills up by end of April, early May. But if in any given year, if sometimes there isn't enough enrollment to run the workshop, I have to make that call by the end of April. Because usually if there aren't enough people by the end of April, usually there aren't going to be enough people because of that. Because people usually plan for a workshop of this nature in advance. So the most important thing is, if you are going to register, is to do it before the end of April, because there's been years where I've canceled it and had everybody enrolled in time, it would have gone ahead, right? So that's the only thing logistically in terms of registration. It's important to try and make a decision and register before the end of April, or at least to let me know that you're planning to register before the end of April. Then logistically, once you register, there's information that you get on our website that gives you all the details of what you need to bring and how the workshop works as much as possible. I never give an extremely detailed view of how it works, partly because of what I've said before. I don't want people to have too many preconceived ideas going into it, and because it doesn't always move exactly the same from one group to another, right? But once you register, there's a PDF that you get that explains everything that you need to know, and then you just show up. I don't know. Again, this is a feeling thing, you know. A slightly larger group is good because energetically people support each other, both in terms of their interactions and sharing, and also when groups of people get together and they're doing these exercises, it actually builds the energy. So but then on the other hand, if there's too many people, then it becomes a little bit unwieldy, because we do spend a lot of time sharing and it starts to cut into our time to do other things. So I typically cut it off at around 14 or 15 people. But I can't always say that, because some years it just feels like I need to cut it off less, and maybe it's 13 people. Um, and some years there have been a couple of occasions where I'll get someone coming in, I'm sort of at what I would normally consider the limit, and someone comes in and they really want to do it, and I just sort of feel into it, and I can feel that they need to do it at this time. So I might have 16 or 17, but usually I cut it off at around 14 or 15, but it's not a hard and fast rule. Um, you know, yeah, yeah, I feel it, right? When it's time to cut it off. They can do either. There are rooms available. The rooms, the indoor rooms, each have two twin beds and sleep two people. So if now sometimes if the role if a lot of people want to camp and maybe we've got a smaller number of people. Usually the minimum number of people I need to run the workshop is about 9 or 10. Um, I used to sometimes run it with 8, but the problem is that costs have gone up. So now I set it at 10. And so if you've got, so we can sleep 8 people indoors comfortably, and then a couple of people can sleep on the land. Some people like to camp. So I don't really, so usually people have to share, and we'll have people sharing, if they know someone else in the workshop and they're that's attending, they can share with someone that they choose. Sometimes single rooms may be available if a lot of people are camping. The other option is camping. So it's one or the other. Some people prefer to camp, just so that because they like to be outdoors on the land. I often camp myself during the workshop because I like to. It's nice to be out on the land, feeling the land, sleeping on the land overnight. But that's kind of what it looks like. Okay, the meals are almost exclusively vegetarian. We try and tailor the meals so that they meet the needs of the greatest number of people, right? To keep it as simple as possible. So the meals are, sometimes Kate might do fish or chicken on one meal. If we tell people that if they really, really have to eat meat, to bring something to supplement, if they want animal protein, some jerky or something like that. But there are things like eggs and things available too. The main meals are vegan, and usually the stuff like dairy and eggs is on the side, so that if people are vegan, they can eat the main meals, and if people are vegetarian and not vegan, there are dairy and egg options on the side. And then if people have specific sensitivities like gluten or whatever, we can usually deal with that. Now, you can only with a group of people, you can only do that up to a point. We try to accommodate people as much as possible, but so we always ask people if they have any food sensitivities to let us know in advance, and Kate will work with that as much as possible, or at the very least warn people if there's something in some part of the meal that they can't eat. And if they have really serious restrictions, we sometimes recommend that maybe they bring some other stuff to supplement, just in case. Because but we've never really had any problems. We we do our best to accommodate everybody's needs.